Representative Squirrel.
I don't know. I was asked to say.
We are live. Welcome to Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, September 8th, 2022. The first item on the agenda is to convene, review, and approve the minutes of July 28th. And before we do that, we will introduce ourselves.
My name is Senator Chris Bray. I live in Bristol, Vermont, and I represent the Addison Senate District.
Jenny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden County from Williston.
Carol Odie, representing the far north end in Burlington.
Joe Benning, State Senator from the Caledonia County District.
Trevor Squirrel, representing Underhill and Jericho.
Mark McDonald, representing Orange County in the Vermont Senate.
Anthony Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
And Charlene Dindo is our, keeps us marching to the drumbeat of LCAR. First item on the agenda, review and approve the minutes of July 28th. Senator Bray.
I would move, Mr. Chair, that we approve the minutes of July 28th.
Second.
Been moved that the minutes be approved. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay, and the minutes have been approved. First item on the agenda, 22P08, Vermont Occupational Safety and Health Administration VOSHA rule, updated to the Valerian standard for the construction and shipyard industry. And speaking on behalf of the rule, Dan Whipple is back, as this rule has been held over to get additional information from Mr. Whipple and others. Mr. Whipple.
Yes, good morning. Thank you all for taking the time to hear this today. Some of you might remember the first beryllium rule that Vermont engaged in rulemaking. That was for the general industry population of workers. And so this rule does a lot of the same things that the general industry rule did, except for it covers workers in the construction and shipyard industries that Vermont has jurisdiction over. So many of the same simplifications and things like that that were put into the general industry standard are actually put into this standard in subsequent rulemaking by federal OSHA. So Vermont, was compelled to engage in rulemaking for this particular rule.
Are there any questions for the witness? I noticed that there have been some lengthy changes and amendments to the rule. Do you require any specific explanation?
As far as from the agency's standpoint, the extensive amendments were actually an oversight on my part. That I had mistakenly thought that I had annotated parts of the rule that needed to be annotated, and I had not done that due to just getting busy with other things and thinking that I had done it. So those were never subsequent amendments that were put out. They were just oversights on my part that were caught by the legal counsel for LCAR, and so we went back and did the corrections that needed to be done.
Well, for the committee, I stand in error that they were, in fact, not amendments, but technical explanations and changes from the federal stuff. Senator Benning.
Dan, I noticed that when this came through LCAR, that there were 11 recommendations made. Did all of those get incorporated? I didn't have time to cross-check.
Yes, they did. They were all if my memory serves me, they were all recommendations concerning the filing documents. And so I always go back and incorporate those and place them in a new, updated filing documents for LCAR.
Thank you.
Any questions for the witness? Senator Bray.
Not hearing any questions from my colleagues, I move that we approve Rule 22P08 as resubmitted by the Department of Labor in the correspondence from Dan Whipple dated August 12th, 2022.
Okay. You have heard the motion that the rules be amended as recommended by Senator Bray, as written in the memo from Mr. Whipple. Is there any
A quick question.
further discussion?
Did we get confirmation from committee chairs about this rule? Might have been a while ago. So.
You got them, it would be, we'd have it.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
I believe we did with the original filing,
Yeah.
and those are unchanged. I want to thank the witness for explaining why it appears lengthy, and thank him also for going back and double checking. And this is complicated stuff, and thank you, Dan Whipple, for doing that. Okay.
Well, you're welcome, but most of the thanks goes to LCAR's legal counsel for actually pointing those out and allowing me to go back and correct them. So my deep thanks to them as well.
Well, this is Vermont, where we still have a team effort between administrations and support staff, and we're proud of you both. Thank you. We have a motion before us. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Which brings us to 22P12, Department of Financial Regulation, Term and Universal Life Insurance Reserve Financing. Daniel Raddick, Assistant General Counsel, Department of Financial Regulation, is our witness. Pardon?
I'd actually ask that my colleague Hillary Borcherding be permitted to present today, and I'll be there next February for this one.
Okay, we'll thank you. And we'd be glad to have that. We're going to move some chairs so that the witness can get on screen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Please state your name for the record, please.
My name is Hillary Borcherding, and I am Assistant General Counsel at the Department of Financial Regulation. I am joined today by Dan Raddick, also Assistant General Counsel. Also, I believe online we have Karen Ducharme, who is the Director of Licensing and Examination for the Insurance Division of the DFR. We'll all be here to answer any questions that might come up. And I thought that I could start with a brief introduction of the rule. So we're here today to present the new proposed rule, namely Term and Universal Life Insurance Reserve Financing, which is the Secretary of State proposed Rule 22P012. The proposed rule establishes a uniform nationwide method for calculating the economic reserves for term and universal life insurance insurers and the quality of the assets required in those transactions. This is admittedly a highly technical and specialized regulation. It applies only to certain transactions between some of the largest insurers and the world's largest banks. The rule establishes a set of standards in those transactions that must be met. Importantly, it does not relate to an insurer or a policyholder or a consumer in Vermont's relationship with their insurer. The proposed rule is based.
Could you repeat that sentence? I missed that.
Yeah, so the standards relate to banks and insurance companies' transactions amongst each other. It doesn't relate to the contract a Vermont consumer or policyholder would have with their insurance company. It doesn't alter that relationship. So the proposed rule is based on the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Model Rule 787. This rule was made an accreditation requirement for all states in 2019, but the process of drafting the rule started before actually 2014. And there were a number of committees in which regulators from all 50 states and territories had an opportunity to weigh in, as well as Vermont DFR and industry partners. So this has been quite a process of getting here today. In the states where this is not, these standards are not already being implemented, implementation of these standards will create an equal playing field between states and won't create a situation where insurance companies can start performing these transactions in certain states and have different rules, but instead we'll have standard rules amongst the states. In those states that aren't already using these standards, this is also helpful because it ensures that insurance companies have adequate reserves in order to pay claims. Here in Vermont, we've already been using these standards for a number of years, so this rule will codify our current practice. So for Vermont consumers and for Vermont insurance companies, there will be no changes. I'll open things up to additional questions for any of us from DFR, but I did want to mention that through the LCAR process and Legislative Council, we have identified 2 changes that would need to be adopted along with the rule. The first is to get rid of some superfluous language that is in subdivision B of sections 4A1 and 4A2. It won't change the content at all. It essentially was a holdover that didn't make sense based on Vermont's timing. And then we will be changing section 10, which is the effective date. It currently reads that the rule becomes effective upon adoption, but statute requires that it is 15 days after adoption. So we'll make that change as well. We thank you for your time and consideration, and we're all here and happy to answer any questions as best we can on this really complicated rule.
Are there any further questions for the witness? This is the key point, I believe, was that there are no changes to Vermont practices, and the federal government has encouraged states to be as uniform as possible so that when you are insuring people, you can't have lay your bets off on other insurance companies who do not have financial reserves, and it is a level playing field for more states than it used to be with the incorporation of these rules. So, is that
Yes.
a thumbnail sketch that
Yes. The only other thing I might add.
survives scrutiny? Okay.
Yes, that's perfect. Is the NAIC accreditation requirement, which I think jives with what you're saying with the federal government. But it also is helpful to know that everybody else will be passing these as well.
Okay.
I think Hillary made the point very well, but it really prevents an insurance company that wants to do a transaction like this from finding the most lax jurisdiction. It sets a fair playing field. You're not going to jurisdiction shop to find a lazy regulator who's going to let you get away with
nefarious
or just more aggressive. I guess it would be really a more aggressive financing transaction or less sound financing transaction.
Representative Odie.
Where are the insurance companies based? Where?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Rathbun.
So the way we see this in Vermont typically is it's actually a Vermont captive that's been established by an out-of-state insurance company. So the transaction I saw, I don't remember if it was a year or 2 years ago, but you had a very large Tennessee-based insurer. It has a Vermont captive. It had also maybe some, it issued some policies in Vermont, but it was primarily this kind of financing transaction is done through the Vermont captive. And then in order to effect the transaction, of course, the Vermont, the DFR has to approve the transaction, but also the regulators in Tennessee were very concerned because it was their home base insurer, and there was a lot of underwriting in Tennessee too. And then the financing party on that one may have been a bank like JP Morgan. It really is, the banks I've seen are like JP Morgan or Nomura Bank, one of the largest banks in Japan. So they're truly immense insurers, very large insurers and very large banks doing, as Hillary was saying, top level financing, like the company treasurer figure, doing a top level treasury type operation, not at the policyholder level at all.
So I had another question, if I may, which was, are these companies in the United States? So I learned a bank could be out of country. Could an insurance company, the parent, be out of country?
Well, I would expect that it would be a US-based insurer that would be submitting to want to do this type of transaction because they're submitting to US and NAIC principles. I guess all I can say is I've only seen US-based insurers doing these.
But banks?
For the bank itself, like Nomura was a Japanese bank, but it would be done through its US branch. I think we would insist that it be a US, we would insist that it would be a US-based bank providing the financing. So
and why would that be important to you?
Let's see. I would say I think under NAIC principles, you'd want to make sure you had first of all, I think a foreign bank needs to operate NAIC principles, but I think a foreign bank typically needs to establish a branch in the US in order to do many types of operations. But also I think just in terms of jurisdiction and enforcing what is essentially a bank guarantee. A bank is providing a guarantee, so we're much more comfortable if it's an onshore bank that we can easily enforce court process on should something go wrong.
Let me make a comment, Senator Odie. We've been dealing with captive insurance companies for years, and most people understand that you never want to put all your eggs in one basket. And captive insurance companies don't put all their eggs in one basket, and they look for a variety of backups. You had a technical term for that. I call it laying off the bets. And these rules are our captive insurance people making sure that the baskets that people put, the various baskets they put the money in, meet higher standards than they might otherwise meet if not for the law that we passed and the rules to carry that out. So I think that's the issue. It's pretty technical stuff, and you're welcome to ask your question.
It's a little beyond that, but what do if any, taxes and fees do the insurers and the banks pay to Vermont?
I don't know the amount offhand, but to do a transaction like this, they would pay fees. I can certainly find out what the fees are. They are not cheap transactions for many reasons. I mean, the legal fees to do a transaction like this are enormous. The banks would charge fees to write a guarantee, and then also as a state, we charge certain fees to do it, or we would charge certain fees to do a transaction like this. because it takes up a significant amount of time. But I'm not sure exactly what those fees are offering.
Presumably fees to set up a captive in Vermont, if that was part of
If
the
it,
process.
exactly. Yeah.
Senator Lyons.
But the fees are not standardized nationally. So the fees could, I mean, if, I remember a discussion a few years ago regarding large institutions such as Morgan Stanley and raising the rates for their fees. And that could be, that could preclude participation in state activities. So it's interesting that those fees are still out there floating, and it would be, I'm not on the committee of jurisdiction, but it would be fascinating to look at a comparative analysis of fees across the country and see who's doing what, how it's being handled. Another day.
Senator Lyons and Senator Bray and myself have all served on finance, and every year we get a bill that makes modifications that seek to keep Vermont as the #1 business state for captive insurance, and that's because we have a reputation for having sound insurance practices and policies. So, Senator Bray.
So I have a quick question about how you implement this. How do you review the soundness of the transactions? Is it, given their size and scope, it's a remote bank, do you have outside auditors that you call in, or do they submit all the paperwork to your office and it's an internal review?
For you, since you handle these.
Yeah, so an application would go into our captives, would indeed go to the captives division, where the insurer who would like to do this kind of transaction will have employed their own actuary, describing the soundness of the transaction. And then the captive, our captive insurance staff, like they always do, will review the materials supported by the insurer. And and I will say these transaction binders are enormous. Not just the actuarial report is a small part of it. The legal documents are daunting, but they will review the entire transaction. And assuming they're comfortable with what the actuaries have presented to them, the insurer's actuaries have presented to them, and that they're comfortable with the legal documentation. So they'll bring in legal staff from the DFR to look at that legal documentation as well. That may be sufficient. If they were to look at the actuarial report and say, this is not up to snuff, or we have real doubts about this, as a first step, they would get the actuary. They would have the sponsoring insurer and their actuary on the phone and would quiz them carefully, and could in fact say, well, we don't accept this. We're going to find another actuary to take a look at this. If you insist on, at that point, we're talking about a transaction that they don't know. So presumably they would say, we're going to get our own actuary and you're going to pay for it. Do you still want to pursue?
Senator Lyons.
Unless the chair has recognized anyone with further questions, I would like to make a motion to approve Rule 22P12 as presented with the 2 corrections that you mentioned. Second.
Senator Bray, do you have the language that Senator Lyons is referring to?
Sure.
2 items.
So for the record, I move that we approve Rule 22P12, determining universal life insurance reserve financing regulation 22017I with sections 4A1B and 4A2B removed and other necessary conformity provisions. And section 10 modified to read, this regulation shall become effective and with an insertion of date later, and shall pertain to all covered policies in force and after that date.
Senator Lyons has so moved. Thank you, Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Senator Gray.
Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the rule has been approved. Thank you for ending this year's cycle of updating our captive insurance laws that I think will continue to keep Vermont the leader of captive insurance here in the state, in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Which leaves us with other business. I would seek to bring to the committee's attention a matter having to do with updating of rules in the area of 911 and the, what's the term I'm looking for? Council, the board that regulates 911 and deals with dispatching technology, backing up of 911 systems in the state of Vermont.
I think it's the E911 board. I just emailed Maria, and she's and the pink lady going to head over.
And
I didn't know you were gonna do it during-
Maria Royale will share with us the concern and whether or not there's a called for remedy or whatever we might wish to do. So she's on her way over from
I just emailed her.
next door. So. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Get that over here. See if Maria couldn't have come over. So
Mr. Chair, we have
we're in recess here. We'll be talking amongst ourselves.
Right,
but we're not
recess.
conducting,
I have a question
business.
for other members of LCAR may have received inquiries about rules motivated by recommendations out of the Vermont Climate Council. And although I don't know that there's anything in our in-basket yet, I was wondering if maybe we could ask council to help us look into it a little bit. My question, and maybe you've already done this, is when we engage in rulemaking, we delegate authority and we also provide direction. And I don't know that we've delegated authority to the Vermont Climate Council to engage in rulemaking or what direction we provided. And I also, it's my impression that they sort of work hand in glove with Agency of Natural Resources, which often does rulemaking. And I don't know to what degree related to the Global Warming Solutions Act, we've both authorized and directed either the Climate Council and ANR to be in a position to bring forward rules to the legislature. But if you could help us start to get a clearer picture of that, that would be helpful, I think. Something may be coming our way.
Yeah.
We will, that was going to be the next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's no problem. The next item we were going to bring up having to do with California changing its law.
Yeah.
And how Vermont, LCAR, and the legislature deal with those changes. And so we understand what the choices are. But Maria,
I'll get Ellen here.
we're going to go back to the question that you were asked to take a look at.
Maria Royal with Legislative Council. I don't have actually formal testimony. This was an issue that just came up the other day. So I think it's kind of discussion, not sure if it's something you want to pursue or not, but it has to do with 911 board standards and rules related to coming up with locatable addresses for the 911 system. So how they're determined, the road names, the numbering, everything. So the original statute, I think, was enacted in 1994. A year later, and in statute, it's required. It's not, the problem is the language is not very clear about whether the particular standards related to those locatable addresses should be adopted by rule or by standards developed by the board, the 911 board. But just for the sake of history, I think the statute may have been adopted in about 94. The initial rule was adopted about 95. And the original standards, which were not adopted by rule, but were standards, were adopted or were developed in about 1995. The reason why I'm saying this is because those standards have been amended and the statute has been amended at least a couple of times since then. So the practice has not generated controversy, and the legislature has looked at the statute and looked at the standards. I'm just letting you know that. However, recently, a question was raised about the statutory language and whether there actually should be, they should have been promulgated or adopted by rule. So those standards are currently being revised by the 911 board. I think they're in the final stages of reviewing some edits and amendments. And the question was, is this something that should be done by rule? Is it something you would like to be done by rule, which might require some legislative action, some clarification? Or is the practice, as you understand it, consistent with your intent? In any event, it may be something to be clarified. But that's the issue. It just came up. I did reach out to Barb Neal just to understand a little bit more about the history and the status of things. I didn't mention it was coming up today because I wasn't sure it was formally coming up today. So anyway, that's something that can be looked at further. If you want to look at it further, take additional testimony or make a decision.
Senator Bray.
Thanks for the intro. And I'm just curious, can you fill us in a little bit more on like who's raising the question? Is someone, who's raising the question and to what end?
This is Senator McDonald received a oral question, I believe, from a constituent.
Yeah.
Concerns about it.
The E911 board is making changes. And if the changes are to conform with statute, that's one thing. If they are to, those changes are to establish new and different policies, then the committees of jurisdiction might be the ones to authorize changes in policy. And we don't know we're not sure right now what the 911 board is going to be looking at. So we know whether or not it's a change in policy or simply a technical continuation of current statute. And we asked council to take a look at that, and
just,
we could perhaps offer an opinion at a future meeting.
Sure, and just to clarify a little bit further, there is a rule on locatable addresses that the 911 board has adopted. But what it does is it says you must comply with this rule pursuant to the standards. And then the bulk of the requirements are done not through rulemaking, but through the board's development. So that was the issue about whether that is a proper way of developing the standards and whether it's how you would like. And like I said, it's been ongoing for many years. So
and
maybe just
technology has changed.
Yep.
There are issues of expending money to carry out standards or rules, and whether or not issues of redundancy and things that I couldn't characterize whether they're going to change policy on 911, and LCAR would be, and the committees of jurisdiction would be advised to know if there's if there's anything we ought to know and be prepared to act on or not act on. So, Senator Lyons.
So I think you've said it all. So it seems to me that Ledge Council can provide maybe a short written document about what's happened and what the statute might say, and then what is actually going on in terms of rulemaking versus standards, and allow for both us to look at that, but also I agree with you, it's really a committee of jurisdiction should also be looking at that. And that would be institutions where this would lie.
Conceivable, and I'm just going through my own head, the particular person who populates our hall on a regular basis, having this conversation that the standards are leaving a lot to be desired, and I would think that's not LCAR's responsibility. That's committees of jurisdiction.
Yep.
I'm not interested in opening up a can of worms if there aren't any worms, so
I think
I don't want this to be a manufactured problem.
No, but I think even recollection of the witness testimony, not yours, Maria, but Barbara Neal, there was some desire for more clear direction. And I believe that's going to have to come from community jurisdiction. Just floating out what I know thus far.
Senator Bray.
It seems as though it might be helpful to look at the existing standard and the proposed new standard, see if we could have those. Sure. So that we'd have a sense of how far had they sort of migrated, and did we sense as a committee that these were in fact starting to become policies.
Sure.
So
Yep, I think we can have those emailed to you.
thank you. So we'll know how technology has changed and whether or not the current system makes for a smooth transition or requires someone more well-versed in this committee to take a look at it. So, thank you.
I need to add something.
Oh, Anthea, please,
From the
bail me out.
I'm just adding, not billing them out. So from the APA perspective, and we can include this in what Maria works on, rules can incorporate standards that have been adopted by an agency, but it's a standard, it's not a rule, so it doesn't have the full force and effect of law. I don't know if there's any case law on what the standard means, if it's incorporated into the rule, and if that then gives it full force and effect of law. From a procedural standpoint, standards are not defined in the APA, but practice, procedure, and guidance documents are. And LCAR can require an agency to initiate rulemaking to adopt I think it's practice and procedure, but not a guidance document. I don't know if the standards would meet any of those definitions. I also don't know if it's something that LCAR would want to do, and just because they initiate rulemaking doesn't mean that it would be adopted. So LCAR is, as LCAR frequently is, in this weird position where you can't really do anything, but you can sort of send letters to committees of jurisdiction. You could have a hearing like you did under your procedural rules with the general assistance issue back in October. You can just sort of flag this for the committees of jurisdiction. So you're in this sort of LCAR position of you are being given information, constituents are reaching out to you because of your position on LCAR, but LCAR is a little bit limited in terms of actually changing anything that is happening.
So we in Vermont are several decades into 911 and technology, and I'm going to use an analogy, if we are at a VHS or Betamax moment, and we've got to go one way or the other as we update our 911, who will make that decision? An appointed board, a legislative committee, and give us, as the Committee on Rules some guidance on how we can, if it is a VHS Betamax moment, provide some guidance for the various parties. I think that's what we're.
Could be an AT&T Comcast moment.
Yeah, okay. So,
It just seems a little wonky that the E911 board is developing a standard change. Because in my book, technically, it should always be overseen by a legislative committee of jurisdiction to keep the citizens' right of elected representatives in that conversation.
summarize the spirit in which the question has been brought up. So, thank you, Senator Bennett.
The wonky part, was that the?
No, okay. So is there, if there's no further discussion and you're going to come back to us?
Sure, I can write up a description, I can provide the standards and the proposed edits and.
Perhaps we'll write a letter to the committees of jurisdiction, or perhaps we'll say it's hunky-dory the way it is. Okay.
Great, sounds good.
Wonky-dory or it's.
So, to follow up on what Senator Bray brought to our attention earlier, we in Vermont, and I think more than a dozen other states in the teens, have adopted these California standards for automobiles. And California changes its standards periodically. A couple decades ago, California made some substantial changes in gas mileage standards, and the administration, the Douglas administration, brought to LCAR new rules to carry out the California standards. And LCAR had a debate on that, and it came to a conclusion. And with the new California law on gas and electric vehicles, I think scheduled for, to the 2035, more than a decade out, LCAR may or may not get a request from the administration, or it may get a request from a petition from the public, or a committee of, so the legislature may draft a statute, and all of those things are possibilities. So I thought we would ask council to tell us what we might expect and in this particular instance.
I'd expect it soon. It's been through LCAR. I believe they're doing 4 public hearings now. 1 is remote, and then 3 are gonna actually be in physical locations around the state. I think they're trying to get it adopted, so through your review of it by the end of the year, so it can be applicable to the 2024 model year. So I would expect it sooner rather than later. In terms of the authority to adopt the rule, I don't think ANR thinks that they need any additional authority beyond what they needed to adopt the first iteration of California's rules under its waiver from the Clean Air Act, which Vermont is allowed to sort of piggyback on. So yeah, you should be seeing Clean Cars 2 and the truck equivalent rule soon, I would think.
So the 2006 legislation that allowed for Vermont to follow California law had a specific intent of achieving certain goals. So it will be interesting to see what the analysis is by Ledge Counsel, I mean, not necessarily you, and what the legal interpretation is for that, because there are outstanding Vermont questions related to something as categorical as what California is doing, and quite different from specific emission standards linked only to manufacturers. So there are a lot of questions to be asked and answered. 2035 is a bit away, would be great if we could achieve the goal of getting every vehicle in the world electrified and we had all the renewable energy sources necessary to support them.
So one thing
This is a fun question.
That's for committees of jurisdiction to
Committees of
decide.
jurisdiction to go ahead and have fun.
Trying to understand our role, which perhaps is understanding that California law better, or understanding it when it's brought to us on this committee in any capacity.
So a couple things to consider, to just remember there are, it's not a rule that can be changed. So it needs to be California's rule. So under the Clean Air Act, states can't regulate emissions. California was given a waiver, and then other states were able to do what California did. So like earlier today, when you had BOSHA and it needs to track the federal, this would need to track the California rule. And then one thing, and this is getting into the policy behind what California's rule would do, is it is not getting all internal combustion engine vehicles off the road by 2035. It is prohibiting the sale of new vehicles that have been manufactured in those model years. So you would still be able to buy a used Toyota Tacoma from an earlier year. So I think that is something that is being lost a little bit in how this is being reported. But I agree, this is something that is going to get attention.
But to say that it is lost assumes that we understood it to begin with.
And Senator Lyons seems like she definitely understands
We
what's
are
going
on this committee are going to be the folks sooner or later who deal with whatever the public and the administration and the legislature wants to do. But if this is going to be, we're going to be asked in the coming months and the next year, what's the policy? We may choose to send letters to the committees of jurisdiction to ask them to analyze and prepare ourselves for a long discussion, which.
The fact that we may see rules and that rules come through, I think having committees of jurisdiction involved makes so much sense. Otherwise, suppose we were to vote down a specific rule, then that opens up litigation that can go on. So, I think avoiding that, the quagmire of what is possible, important.
And Benny.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I've seen the questionnaire sent out by Paige. I had been previously told that if the policy goes forward the way it is, no new vehicles could be sold that are gas-powered. That if someone purchased a gas-powered vehicle out of state and tried to register it here, that would fail. Is that correct?
It's
Good question.
you were asking the sort of questions that we don't have answers to, and the purpose of bringing this up was for someone to take a look, give the answers to the administration, give the answers to the legislature, and we should be prepared
I don't know where
for whatever comes our way.
I don't know where I heard that from, but I clearly remember seeing that somewhere in an email exchange. And that's only one of the issues. The policy questions obviously are very complicated and should be in a committee of jurisdiction. The other thing LCAR has to worry about is what is the economic impact? And that may fall down to this committee, not a committee of jurisdiction, and being able to get some heads up on what the economic impact of that is.
But, so if it were going to LCAR, that question has to be answered administratively. And so one would assume that there was some discussion at the policy level, both in the administration and in committees of jurisdiction.
It still is incumbent upon LCAR, however.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So would you like to see the materials that the administration has prepared on the economic impact analysis sooner rather than later? So do you want to see what was?
Certainly the committees of jurisdiction would like to see that sooner rather than later.
So what I can do is I can reach out to Megan O'Toole and I can ask for the current iteration of the materials that they've prepared, because they prepare everything, it goes to ICAR. ICAR has already taken this up, and they have now, filed the initial proposed rule. I can never remember when it changes from its different iterations with the Secretary of State that has started the 8 months. So they have their materials. And what they did was, in addition to filling out the forms that you typically see in the packets that Charlene sends, they also have like supplemental information that they prepared. And I can get all of you copies of what they have now. You'll have to know that it might change a little bit before it makes it to LCAR for your final review of it. And Charlene could certainly make that available to the committees of jurisdiction, which then would then raise the question of what the committees of jurisdiction are going to be. Is it going to be House Transportation, Senate Transportation, Senate Natural, and House Natural? Would it be Energy and Technology? So there's that sort of question to wrestle with. And my understanding of your first question, and I would need to go and one, look at the California rule, and two, talk to Megan, is that you would be able to buy an ICE out of state and register it in Vermont.
Would or you would not?
You would. But I'm not sure about that, so.
Those are the types of questions that need to be asked and answered before they ever came to this committee in the form of a recommendation by the administration or rule change, or in the form of a bill from the legislature to conform or depart from California standards. And I think we're bringing this up because it's going to be more controversial than whether or not you can put your life insurance bets, lay them off on shifties of Terra del Fuego as a backup. This will be a debated subject in the months or years to come, and we're not where the answers are going to be made. We're the ones that are going to hold them to the standard of doing it.
Those of us who are running for office currently are about to face this in every forum that we're going to be having a conversation. So for me personally, running for a statewide office, I would very much like to have whatever information you can get in it.
I'll email Megan when we're done here.
Mr. Chair, so my question for council, have you looked at these materials at all yet?
I've skimmed them very briefly, and it's the only time I've gone to an ICAR meeting. I went to the ICAR meeting that they had a few weeks ago.
Process-wise, so from ICAR to here, they're going to be holding public hearings as part of their required public outreach process. And so the rule might be revised on comments they receive, right? Is there other outstanding work for them between here and bringing it to LCAR?
They need to do their public hearings, they need to solicit their written comments, then they need to respond to it, prepare the materials, like they have to, when they do the summary of comments received and tell you like why they didn't change the rule based on the comments they received. One of the things just to consider there is, and this I sort of said in response to Senator Lyons bringing this up in the beginning, it's not a rule, the text of which can really be modified because it needs to track what's happening in California.
Great, well, I look forward to reading it. I mean, I think part of what I'm hearing is some confusion on the public's part between our usual signing on to the California Air Resources Board standard for efficiency or emissions levels versus this other twist that says internal combustion engine cars, I don't know if it's cars and trucks, whatever, vehicles can't be sold after 2035, which is very different kind of creature than saying what the emissions levels are for it. So I don't know if they're both in the same rule, but depending on who I'm talking to, they're thinking of very different rules coming our way. One, some people are focusing on banning combustion engine cars. Some are saying, oh, we're going to go to a higher, lower emissions. And that's the way it was presented by the Secretary of Natural Resources in our committee this past spring in terms of work that was underway. We never heard about banning ICE vehicles, so be interested to see what's in this now.
I have one more question. Been to an ICAR meeting? Are they as much fun as an LCAR meeting?
It was remote. I think these meetings are more fun. But I also know all of you, and I don't know all the members of ICAR, so I can see your personalities even from behind your masks.
The definition of fun.
Yeah.
Would you like me to answer the other part of Senator Bray's question from earlier? So Ellen is not available right now, but I will give a little bit of an answer to the question, and I'm going to fill her in on what we talked about here. So you asked about whether or not, stemming from the Global Warming Solutions Act, there was any rulemaking that was authorized in statute or session law. I'm not aware of anything.
Yep.
There certainly would have been a lot of it if the Clean Heat Standard bill had been enacted, because that, in addition to authorizing rulemaking, set up that sort of tiered process with the PUC and then the hearings, and then it sort of jumped into the rulemaking process at a later date because it would be using the committee process as sort of a substitute for some of the other steps in the rulemaking process. In terms of TCIP, the Transportation Climate Initiative Program, that my understanding was that the Agency of Natural Resources did not think they would need authority to go through the rulemaking process to participate in TCIP because of existing authority in statute, but that the General Assembly would definitely need to be involved because of all of the money that would be involved in setting up a fund and then specifying how that money would be spent. So there could be the authority for the rulemaking side to regulate, but there would then need to be additional General Assembly involvement on the other piece of TCIP. But since TCIP is sort of in this holding pattern,
Right.
not something that really came up in the last session. I would say those are the two proposals that originated in the report from the Climate Council that got the most attention and would make an impact. And that's my understanding of where those two pieces are. But I'm sure Ellen knows more about what's been going on or what's been proposed. And I'm sure you're going to hear about the Clean Heat Standard again next session.
Yes, I'm sure that too. Well,
Senator Lyons.
So as you're looking at ICAR information and anything that you can share with us, I'm not looking for this, but it would be nice to have one or two. But if there's any discussion around all the things that are necessary in order to implement something like this by the date 2035, including all the questions that need to be answered. And so is that discussion happening, or is this simply an exercise in putting forward rules that match on the surface what California is doing? So the depth of conversation and the regulatory needs, are those is the depth of conversation happening? And are the regulatory needs and issues being explored administratively? Because, you know, as the chair has said, there's several different committees involved in this. So are all of those issues being explored across the administration? If it's not happening, that's a great concern. So if it is happening, then they would be referring legislative action, legislative issues to legislators, to the policy committees, and maybe having a dialogue about what's next with LCAR. It's like,
Senator Lyons.
yes.
Senator Benning has let us know that this is going to be a hot political issue.
It's going to be a hot button issue.
And our role is not establishing policy.
No, I don't want to establish policy. You're misinterpreting what I'm
No, I
saying.
haven't missed.
Okay.
No, our role is not establishing policy. I think the reason we're discussing this today is so the public knows that there will be a robust discussion about what the policy will or won't be. On one end would be, accept the California rule as written, piece by piece by piece. And on the other end would be, well, we like parts of the California rule and we don't, and we should carve out by statute and amend policy. And we, on this committee, don't do that as this committee. We wait until it's done and that's worked out, and we get a recommendation from the legislature.
You're absolutely
or the
right.
administration.
That's exactly why I raised all the issues that are so rampant through this kind of decision-making, that committees across the legislature, this building, need to be engaged. And I would hope that the administration is sorting out some of those issues right now, as they go through ICAR. It should be a hugely robust process. Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
And I think Senator Benning has said that
Yeah.
what's going to happen and the interpretations of the California are all yet to be made. And we'll be ready when that process is done to see what gets sent to us.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Senator Bray.
And so something you just said, Senator McDonald, about are we going to agree to X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, the whole, I don't know if it's an adopt all provisions with no changes, or if there's an allowance for severability, so that we might adopt all provisions, 99% of the provisions with no change, but exclude one. So it's not changing one, but excluding one. I don't know if there's severability allowed if you're one of the California, so-called California states.
Yeah. My understanding is under the Clean Air Act, it's probably an all or nothing, but there might be some subtlety in there that would allow some deviation. Again, I think Megan O'Toole is going to be the person who could answer that question now without having to do research. Has also probably fielded that question already.
So the games have begun.
Nothing like a little excitement.
So in terms of things you're going to be getting, I believe you're going to be getting materials from Maria that show the standards and the revisions that are proposed. We'll put together the summary memo there that'll have some of the history that Maria went through, the comparison piece, and then a little bit about like what LCAR can do now, but that could be something that's a next session General Assembly issue. You can decide what you want to do in terms of sending anything to committees of jurisdiction. I will reach out to Megan O'Toole and get you what she could provide me in terms of the materials that exist in their current form, knowing that they will change before they come to LCAR. You also will only have, and maybe Senator Lyons, you will like this, the materials that have been prepared, not the public comments that are going to be received over the course of the hearings that they're going to do, and the open window to receive written comments. So you can sort of decide what you want to do with that advanced look piece that you have. And Senator Benning, I will ask that one question of Megan about the buy in another state register in Vermont after 2035.
I saw that come by somewhere, and my recollection is it was an official statement from somebody. I saw it. It was the first time I had been confronted with it. So I'm concerned because I am being asked those kinds of questions right now.
It's a process.
My impression
Long
is that it's
process.
not the laws interpreted currently. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to bring a car from a non-California state and register it in Vermont. I've never heard of an exclusion for that.
No, it's a similar question for crossing state lines for a lot of
All
things.
that I want to be able to do is say to a constituent, this is what my understanding of the process is. And if I was forced to vote X or Y today, this is what my vote would be. I think we owe that to people on the campus.
One quick question. So did I hear you right that as part of what's required for ICAR submission, that includes the economic impact analysis?
Yeah, so when you look at, and I bet it's in the one for MOSHA, because as Senator Benning pointed out, there was a series of things they were supposed to address.
Right.
You'll see economic impact analysis number 3, include the estimated costs and benefits. So if you were to go to the Secretary of State's website and you download the forms that are filled out, the ones that have like kind of the sort of unusual typeface, those are filled out and then they're submitted to ICAR, and then you are getting those forms as they're like changed by the agency as it goes through the process. And some of the forms change slightly, which is why, and Representative Squirrel pointed this out, like a year ago, the numbering scheme changes a little bit on some of the forms as it goes from being the proposed rule cover sheet to the final proposed cover sheet. But yes, that's prepared. ICAR looks at it. In my experience, helping all of you and helping the administration make sort of small changes like, oh, maybe this paragraph doesn't need to be there anymore. It seems like ICAR spends a lot of time looking at the filing forms and maybe less time looking at the text of the rule. So these forms are definitely prepared before one of the first parts of the official process of how the rule becomes a rule or an amended rule or anything like that.
Well, this will be an interesting issue. Citizens and members of this committee and members of committees of jurisdiction, we're all eager to learn more and question.
Climate and energy never seem to have any dull topics.
There's no
Well, I know one
discussion.
thing for sure, I won't be on this committee when it all comes to it.
You might. You might. I think they're trying to get it done before the end of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Just for you,
Well, never.
by November 1st, they want to be in the room.
Did I tell you I must have a trial scheduled for November?
So if we've wrapped this up, is there any further business to come before LCAR today?
LCAR's taking
You
a
wanna do
brief
the honors?
vacation between October and
Sure.
January. Oh,
It sounds like you're not meeting next time though.
do we have, can I ask Charlene a question?
Senator Lyons?
Do we have the PUC rules?
I haven't sent them to you.
You haven't sent it, because I started looking for them.
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
thank you.
I will probably next week by the end of the
Okay, that's good.
Senator Benny?
In that case, having the ability to channel Linda Myers, who I had a very lovely little brief chat at the Chittenden Fair last weekend. And she says to say hi to everybody. I would move that we adjourn.
Senator Benning has moved it. We adjourn. There's no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Hi.